Ow, it hurts. Help me. I can only whimper softly as I protect my aching back and legs. The moment I arrived at my apartment's parking lot, the car that had been parked in front of me suddenly sped towards me at a furious pace. Before I could dodge, the car hit me, and a loud thud echoed throughout the parking lot. I hit the asphalt hard with my back and butt, and as I was enduring that pain, I squinted due to the pain in my thigh. Perhaps I got a cut from the fall. Blood was steadily oozing from my thigh. Everything went white before my eyes, but I heard the car door open. Out from the passenger side stepped my husband. "Oh, it's you," I called out to my husband with a trembling voice, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. Walking to the front of the car, my husband's gaze was fixed solely on the front bumper that had hit me. He carefully examined the car from every angle, not responding at all, no matter how much I called out to him. When he finally seemed to snap out of it, he looked to the driver's seat with a gentle smile and said, "There's no damage to the car." "Are you okay, Mom? That was a shock, wasn't it?" It seemed that to Bob, his pale-faced mother-in-law in the driver's seat was more important than me, bleeding right in front of him. Rage surged from deep within me, and after that, my name is Catherine. I'm a 25-year-old office worker. I moved from a remote island in Hawaii to a university in New York, and landed a job near the university right after. I started dating a salesman, Dave, who came to our company, and we just got married a month ago. Catherine, even if you're going to continue working, where should we live? Maybe we should consider buying a house soon. Why don't we rent an apartment for now? We can look for a place and discuss what kind of house to build later. But I also want to live in our own house someday, so let's start saving up, I replied. Just talking about the future made us happy. Dave was an only child. His family consisted of just my mother-in-law. A few years ago, his father passed away, leaving Dave and my mother-in-law. Soon to be married, we had been looking at various rental properties. But one day, my mother-in-law suggested that we live with her. While I was hesitant about living together so soon after getting married, Dave quickly assured my mother-in-law that we wouldn't. Instead, he mentioned that he didn't want to leave my mother-in-law alone, so he suggested renting a place close to my in-laws' house. I thought it was better than living together, so I agreed. We decided to rent an apartment within walking distance from my in-laws' house in Nebraska. Catherine, thank you so much. I'm so glad to have both of you nearby. After your father-in-law passed away, it was just me and Dave. If Dave had left too, I would have been scared. So thank you truly. Thank you too. I'm glad to have you close by, mother-in-law. And this dinner is so delicious. Thank you. It's no problem, darling. Cooking in big batches always tastes better, so don't mention it. Since we were within walking distance, my mother-in-law often checked on us. Both of us were working full-time, and when our busy periods overlapped, we would get home late. Knowing this, she would bring over a home-cooked meal once a week. Honestly, we usually came home late during our busy times, so having my mother-in-law's cooked dinner was a lifesaver. My mother-in-law is a kind and wonderful person. I felt lucky to have found such a loving partner. My own mother had always been delighted with my husband and mother-in-law, saying they were wonderful people since our marriage introduction. My husband and I continued to enjoy our married life, always getting along. On weekends, we often went for drives. My husband loves cars, and he drives a big right-hand drive vehicle. You really love cars, don't you, Dave? I've never met anyone who loves cars as much as you do. Really? My car is always clean, right? I think I have to keep it clean, especially when I'm driving you around, Catherine. Just like my husband says, riding in a clean car feels good. I loved these moments with my husband. I believed that this happiness would last forever. However, I started feeling that our days might be disrupted about a month after our marriage. Mom, stop it. I'm not a kid. I can eat on my own. But look, what if you hurt your hand? You work on the computer, so it's a no-no. I can manage. Catherine's here too. It's okay. I've always helped you like this, right? Let me do it for you. That day, my mother-in-law came to our place with crab. My mother-in-law carefully removed the crab meat and handed it to my husband. I watched this scene from the kitchen, finding it odd. My husband is the same age as me. He can eat crab on his own, and Even if he works with computers, he's more of a salesperson who travels, so it's not a critical issue. When he ate crab with me, he peeled it and ate by himself without getting hurt. Dave, look at this piece. It's loaded with meat. Here, open up. It's okay. I can eat by myself. Just drop it, okay? My mother-in-law was snugly feeding him crab right next to my husband. Honestly, I thought he could eat it, even if she wasn't that close to him. Starting that day, I began to notice how close my husband was to my mother-in-law. After feeling that way, I started to be bothered by every little thing. Today, I'm gonna drop Mom off at her class. Wait, what? Weren't we gonna go to a movie this evening? I even bought the tickets. I'm sorry. The movie will probably be out on DVD soon, so we can watch it then. Since we already bought the tickets, just go see it by yourself today. It might not be to the point where he's a mama's boy, but for some reason, my husband always listens to what my mother-in-law says. A little while ago, my mother-in-law suddenly called in the evening saying she wanted sushi. That day, we had planned to go out for a barbecue. We were just about to leave the house when she called. I thought maybe we'd all go to the sushi place together, but my husband just told me, sorry, go have dinner by yourself, and left to meet my mother-in-law. When I confronted my husband after he returned home, he just said he'd be careful next time, but he never changed. Whenever there was a clash between something I wanted and what my mother-in-law wanted, for some reason, he always prioritized my mother-in-law. And my mother-in-law just took it for granted. In fact, my mother-in-law tried to stay close to my husband as much as possible. It seemed like it was my husband's idea, but my mother-in-law started delivering dinner to our place and often stayed to eat with us. This became a weekly, sometimes bi-weekly routine. Even if I kept refusing, thinking it would be too much of a burden on my mother-in-law, she just brushed it off with, I live close by, so it's okay. On top of that, she would invite us over to my in-laws' home for tea or meals during the weekends. Naturally, our alone time as a couple dwindled, and I couldn't find time to do house chores over the weekend. If I suggested my husband go alone, my mother-in-law would strongly request that I come along, too. Whether she came to our place or we were called to my in-laws, it was always the same. My mother-in-law started criticizing me for not doing enough around the house. Catherine, I know you both work, but you need to prepare a decent dinner. So, relying solely on takeout is just not how a housewife should be. Excuse me, when I get home late, it's been arranged for Dave to buy his favorite takeout. What on earth is that? Not only do you barely cook, but you're letting your husband do the grocery shopping for dinner? I can't believe it. Do you even realize how busy Dave is? You're his wife. You should be thinking about your family's nutrition and at least preparing meals. Upon hearing my words, my mother-in-law's eyes widened in surprise. The older woman crossed her arms, looking up at me, and began to speak in a firm tone. Honestly, I'm the one making most of your dinners, aren't I? I thought maybe once a week because of being busy, but now it's twice, sometimes even 3 times. Plus, you eat at our place on weekends. You hardly ever have the chance to make dinner yourself. Everyone's busy, you can't just use that as an excuse all the time. I couldn't hide my sigh at my mother-in-law's words. Who did she think was to blame for the reduced time to prepare dinner? The unsolicited meals, despite numerous refusals, were always pushed onto us by my mother-in-law. As I was about to retort, my husband stepped in front of me and gave me a stern look. That's right, Catherine. Mom's cooking is delicious, but you can't always take advantage of it. It's too much of a burden on her. And, you know, only eating takeout isn't healthy. You gotta start making some homemade meals from time to time. Well said, Dave. After all, in a marriage, the husband really needs to keep his wife in line, doesn't he? But, you know, Dave, it's not that your mom doesn't like cooking. I know, Mom, your home-cooked meals are my favorite. And then, my mother-in-law and my husband seem to create a world of just the two of them. They didn't notice that I was saying nothing, nor the cold stare I was giving them. Catherine is young, so I get it. Even if she had time, I doubt she could whip up a tasty meal. Probably some over-seasoned dish without giving much thought to nutrition. Exactly. Catherine loves barbecue, so there are a lot of meat dishes. Plus, she's a bit naive about some things. Meat isn't the be-all and end-all. You gotta think about veggies, too. Catherine isn't quite there yet in terms of nutrition. She doesn't have the experience as a housewife like you do, Mom. My husband stated, joining my mother-in-law in belittling me. I mean, at this point it seems ridiculous to even argue. If I just keep quiet and wish they'd hurry up and leave, they'd just gang up and ridicule me for being rude. But if I ignore even that, eventually my satisfied mother-in-law will head back to her in-laws' house. As soon as my mother-in-law is gone, my husband starts playing games on his phone, and I confront him. Hey, what's the deal? You have her bring over food she wasn't even asked to make, then get mad at me for not cooking. I can't cook, because she always brings over so much food. And you two keep harping about cooking and cleaning, but don't you realize that with her coming over so often, I don't have the time? If you want me to do these things, stop inviting her. If you prefer her company, why don't you just go live with her? At my words, my husband glances at me and smirks. What's the matter? Jealous? We've always been close, you know? People around town talk about how tight we are. Besides, if you learned from my mom, you'd get better at these things, right? Instead of telling her not to come, why don't you learn a thing or two? Excuse me? Taken aback by his nonsensical response, I was left speechless. Maybe he wasn't expecting a reply, because my husband's attention shifted back to his phone game. I could feel the weight in my heart. Steve was no longer the man I had once fallen in love with. After that, I began to stand up to my mother-in-law even if it meant being disliked by her. Still, she'd often barge in, saying, I'm here to teach you. Finally, at my wit's end, I didn't let my mother-in-law into the house when she arrived, and told her bluntly that she was being a nuisance. My mother-in-law looked stunned, but then shouted back in anger. After pushing her out the front door and closing it firmly, the next thing I knew, my husband came home and together they stormed into the living room, shouting and making a scene. That seemed to be the last straw. My mother-in-law even started interfering in my work. Catherine, can't you cut back a bit on your work hours? The house isn't clean, even during the weekdays. Shouldn't you be keeping it tidy? Today is Dave's turn to tidy up. So please tell Dave, how could you? Making your hardworking husband clean the house? I work outside too. We both work, so both of us should share household chores. Even though my mother-in-law understands the concept of partners working, she firmly believes that household chores are the wife's responsibility. That's probably why she thinks I'm pushing those duties onto my husband. My mother-in-law sighed deeply, looking exasperated. Catherine, there's a difference in income between you and Dave. Isn't it common for the one earning less like you to handle more household chores? If you can't handle that, maybe you should consider being a stay-at-home wife. Unfortunately, our incomes are nearly the same. Plus, on Dave's income alone, it's impossible for me to stay home. That's why I have to work too. We both work full-time and get home around the same time. Yet you expect only me to handle the chores? It's not about when you get home. You clearly lack respect and gratitude towards your hardworking husband. Without waiting for my retort, my mother-in-law dramatically waved her hand and let out another exasperated sigh. I wanted to retort that there was no gratitude or respect for my husband, but my mother-in-law wasn't even trying to listen to me anymore. Despite the ongoing conflict between my mother-in-law and me, my husband had never once listened to my side of the story. Instead, he teamed up with my mother-in-law, taking her side and blaming me. He stopped doing any chores around the house and started spending more time at my in-laws' home than at our own. Whenever I pointed this out, he would lash out at me with incredible fury. So I just let him go on like this. It was easier for me to let him spend time at my in-laws' house rather than being with him. Then one day I got off work early from a nearby company and was walking home. Just as I entered the apartment complex grounds, I noticed my husband and mother-in-law were about to leave, as our car was parked there. I didn't want to greet them and was about to walk past quickly when suddenly the car lurched forward, aiming straight for me. I tried to dodge, but the car was too fast and it knocked me off my feet. Thankfully, my head was spared, but my leg throbbed with pain. It seemed I had grazed my skin against this rough asphalt when I fell, causing a deep cut. Blood streamed from my thigh. As I wondered what to do, feeling faint from the blood loss, I heard the sound of a car door opening. Out stepped only my husband. He left the passenger door open and began inspecting the area of the car that likely hit me. He didn't even look at me. In the driver's seat with a pale face sat my mother-in-law, who made no move to get out. "Hey!" I called out to my husband, who was still inspecting the front bumper. Finally, he stood up, still bleeding. I thought I needed to get to a hospital, but my husband turned away, walking toward the driver's side. "Car's fine, not a scratch." "Mom, are you okay?" Must have been a shock, right? "Are you good?" I was dumbfounded. Here I was, bleeding in front of him, and all he cared about was the car and my mother-in-law. At my mother-in-law's reassurance, my husband smiled warmly, about to get back into the car, when finally he looked at me. "Hey, don't just sit in the middle of the road. You're blocking cars, you know?" My husband didn't even show concern for me, and his careless remark made my anger explode. "Are you kidding me? You hit someone with your car, and then talk to me like that? It's you who's messing around. You suddenly jumped out, and that's why I hit you. Then you blame my mom. By the way, what were you gonna do if the car got damaged?" At this point, I couldn't believe my husband was the same man I knew. He hit someone, caused injury, and then said it was the victim's fault. Without a word of concern, my husband gestured widely, signaling for me to move to the side of the road. "Worried about the car after seeing someone bleed? You saw me right in front of you, didn't you? It's on you for speeding into me. Who floors it in a parking lot anyway? What if it was someone else? Would you say the same? Huh? You're not a stranger. You're family. Do you understand that if I hit you, I'm the one paying for the repairs? Hitting you doesn't benefit me at all. Do you get that? What do you mean it doesn't benefit you? You were the one who hit me. Why am I the one being blamed?" As my husband and I argued, my mother-in-law, who had been in the driver's seat, finally got out of the car. My mother-in-law approached me, standing tall, looking down at me. "Catherine, do you know how much Dave's car costs? You came charging in, and then had the nerve to speak like this. You should be apologizing first." I was completely dumbfounded, realizing firsthand what that expression meant. Even though she was the one who floored the gas pedal, causing the car to speed up, for some reason, my mother-in-law seemed to believe that I was the one who ran into them. "Why are you playing the victim? This happened because you weren't paying attention. Just like Dave said, this is on you." "That's right. It's on Catherine. Just go home and take care of the house. That's all you're good for now?" I was at a loss for words. Both my mother-in-law and my husband insisted that I had run into them at full speed. My head was spinning from their outrageous claims. Seeing me stunned, my husband forcefully dragged me to the side of the road. Ignoring my groans of pain, he just drove off. Soon after, someone rushed to my side. "Are you okay? I've called the police. Let's get you to a hospital." The person comforting me was a colleague who lived in the same apartment complex. I remembered she was off today, and while thinking about borrowing a towel or something because of the mess, my head started to spin again. Apparently I had lost too much blood. I realized what had happened when I was getting treated in the hospital and recounted the events to the doctors. They told me I needed to be hospitalized for a few days, but I wasn't prepared for this at all. I wasn't sure if my husband was home to bring me things from our place. I didn't really want to rely on him even if he was there. Luckily, there was a gift shop in the hospital, so I asked the nurse to get the essentials for me. The moment I finished calling my company and expressing my gratitude to the colleague who had brought me there, my freshly turned off smartphone vibrated. It was a call from my husband. I hadn't planned on answering, but I accidentally tapped to answer, since I had just been on a call with my colleague. I could hear my husband's voice. "You finally answered. My mom's in a bad situation because of you, and you dare to ignore calls from the family? What? Who are you? There's no hit-and-run driver in my family." I replied firmly to my husband's accusation. "What? You too think my mom did a hit-and-run? Everyone in the neighborhood is talking about how my mom hit someone and fled the cops. Did you report it? Did you apologize to them and to my mom? It was a misunderstanding. She hit someone and drove away. That's hit and run. And for the record, I didn't report it." When I told my agitated husband that it was my colleague who called the police after taking me to the hospital, I heard a faint click of his tongue. "Just clear it up with the police, and it'll all be fine. Hurry up and get here. I have to stay in the hospital. And weren't you sitting in the passenger seat? Do you really think I just randomly walked into the car and fell?" My husband's comment playing the victim pushed me to respond. My husband paused for a moment, but then he began talking to me in a condescending tone. "Listen, Catherine, if everyone thinks my mom hit you by mistake, how do you think she'd feel? She might get so scared she won't drive again. That's just sad. I don't understand what you're saying. I'd prefer someone who drives that dangerously to not drive at all. Why are you being like this? If you just tell the police you weren't looking either, it'll all work out. Don't families help each other out when things get tough?" His annoying tone made me sigh deeply. What you call family and what I call family seem different. When I'm discharged, I'll be sending you divorce papers. The police want my statement too, so I'm going to hang up. Whoa, why are we talking about divorce over something between my mom and you? Unable to bear his words, I hung up. To calm my boiling rage, I took several deep breaths. And as I planned my next steps, I decided to go back to my parents' house. To get to my parents' house, which is similar to an island off the coast of Maine, you have to take a plane and a ferry. Although it's far and challenging to get there, I couldn't hesitate any longer. I had always planned and prepared for the divorce, so packing up my belongings wasn't an issue. I handed the keys to my house to my mother, who had come to the hospital room. If she could take out the belongings I had already packed during the weekdays, it would be all good. During that time, the police came and questioned me. Apparently, after receiving the report, the apartment management company checked the parking lot security cameras and saw footage of me being hit. With the evidence, they said it would lead to the arrest. The arrest of my mother-in-law was a relief. By the time I was discharged from the hospital, she had already been arrested by the police. I heard that when the police went to question her at my in-laws' house, she tried to escape by pushing a police officer away. However, she was easily caught and promptly placed into a patrol car due to the risk of her fleeing. As for me, I did not return home. Instead, I went to my parents' house with the belongings my mother had brought out. I had to quit my job, but I left in high spirits, planning to look for a new job in the city. One reason for my positive mood may have been that when I went to my workplace to apologize and say goodbye, my colleagues kindly saw me off. A few days later, I demanded a divorce from my husband through my lawyer, but he vehemently refused. To make matters worse, he actually showed up at my parents' house in Nebraska. My parents had to hold him back at the front door. He kept insisting that it was all a misunderstanding, but there was already evidence against him. My mother-in-law's crimes could not simply disappear. My husband kept repeating the word family over and over again, which made my father lose his temper and angrily slam the front door shut. "You damn fool! Don't you ever dare call my daughter family again. Get the hell out of here!" Through the window, I could see my husband still trying to force open the door. Suddenly, he turned around and saw some of the island's most intimidating and well-built uncles approaching. He quickly ran towards the dock, probably waiting anxiously for the next ferry. Afterward, my husband and I were able to finalize our divorce. It turns out that the hit-and-run investigation was not only about my mother-in-law, who was driving, but also about my husband, who was in the car with her. Unlike my mother-in-law, who was arrested while trying to flee from the police, my husband cooperated during the investigation and did not attempt to run. Therefore, they chose to conduct a home investigation and he was not detained by the police. However, since he left home, even if it was just a plane and a ferry ride away, he was still considered a flight risk and was detained. Just like my mother-in-law. It seemed like he wanted to show some sign of remorse by agreeing to my divorce request. But at that point, I no longer cared about his feelings. The colleague who told me all this also informed me that my husband and mother-in-law had become the hottest gossip in the neighborhood. Phrases like, "the jerk who is more worried about his hit-and-run mom than his injured wife," or "the lowest of the low," "a mother-son hit-and-run duo," or "like mother, like son, both got arrested," were the talk of the town. Talk of the town. Since it became challenging to contact my husband and my mother-in-law, I had no choice but to rely on a lawyer. But I never wanted to see their faces again, so it's no big deal. Moving forward, there's going to be a lot of back and forth with my husband and my mother-in-law's insurance company, police investigations, and deciding whether or not to press charges. I just hope to settle everything quickly and never have to be in touch with them again. I spent $200,000. Kenny, who didn't even attend my mother's funeral, had unexpectedly flown abroad. $200,000? What on earth did you do with such a sum? Do you remember that grand piano we had at home? I sold it. Coming from a wealthy family sure had its perks. That was a fine piano. I never imagined it would fetch $200,000. It seems Kenny mistakenly thought that the grand piano at home was his. My condolences. The inheritance rights to the family estate are all mine. However, that piano was originally bought by our grandfather for my brother, and it still belongs to him. My brother, who has always loved the piano and now works as a piano teacher, left it at our family home because it was too big for his house. Given my brother's strong sense of ownership, he would be furious to know that something of his had been sold without his consent. Knowing my brother, simply compensating him won't be enough. When I told Kenny this, he hung up immediately. My name is Rachel Schneider. I'm a 45-year-old office worker. My family has a distinguished lineage that dates back to colonial times and is well known in our community. Moreover, thanks to my late father's successful business, we now own assets worth $9 million. Originally, my older brother was supposed to inherit the family estate. However, he had a girlfriend from a family that also required an heir. Desiring to marry her at all costs, he declared that he would give up all inheritance rights in exchange for not taking over the family responsibilities. This left me with the challenge of needing to find a spouse to continue the family name. Even though I had always wanted to be independent without relying on family wealth, I focused solely on my career. Before I realized, I found myself in my mid-40s and still single. I needed to find someone, or our family line would end with me. So I took a leap of faith and attended a singles mixer. That's where I met my current husband. His name is Kenny, and he's surprisingly 10 years younger than me. At the party, he didn't pay attention to any of the younger women and came straight to me. "Are you sure you want to be with someone as old as me?" I asked him repeatedly, but Kenny looked straight into my eyes and said, "Age doesn't matter to me. I just want to be with you." Straight into my eyes and answered. I'm a bit shy and not very assertive. I've always been drawn to older, more grounded women. True to his words, Kenny gave off a gentle, reserved vibe. I felt that he could bring some peace to my assertive family dynamics. As our relationship progressed, there was something I had to tell him. My mother had been bedridden due to illness since last year, and I was taking turns with my sister-in-law, Catherine, to care for her. Wondering how to break the news since we were considering marriage given our age, I finally told him on our third date. He gladly accepted and even proposed to me, saying he'd like to help with the caregiving. I was deeply touched by his kindness. At least that's how I felt in the beginning. Kenny works as a daycare teacher. However, 4 months into our marriage, he suddenly wanted to quit his job. When I asked why, he replied with a remorseful look, "Sorry, Rachel. The parents at my daycare are just too demanding and complain a lot. I just can't handle it anymore." Surely it must have been tough for Kenny, looking so timid. I would have normally said try a little harder to encourage him, but with him helping with my mom's care now, I couldn't say a word. Plus, I'm 3 months pregnant now. I want to get along well with Kenny for the sake of the baby on the way. I was showing a lenient face, but I soon regretted it. As I came out of the shower and tried to enter the bedroom, I could hear Kenny whispering on the phone. I was shocked at the content of his call. I managed to get married without her finding out. I'm unemployed. She totally believed me when I just told her I quit my job. When in reality I quit like 2 years ago. It sounded like he was talking to one of his buddies. From the other end, I faintly heard a male voice say, "Man, you're really something." Well, Rachel's family is pretty wealthy around here. I thought I hit the jackpot when I saw her at that dating event. But then again, given her age, I was probably the only one to approach her. I felt deceived. Was the gentle Kenny? I knew all just an act. I wanted to confront him immediately, but thinking of the baby, I couldn't utter a word. Knowing Kenny's true intentions, I lost confidence in our future. Today, Catherine will be taking care of my mom until 5 p.m., and then I'll take over. I was pondering whether I should confide in someone about Kenny. That's when my brother's wife, Catherine, spoke to me. Rachel, you look down. If something's troubling you, please share it with me. She's such a kind person. Having taken care of her own mom for years, she's really good with mine, too. I opened up to her about Kenny. She listened intently to my story. It's good you talked. Keeping this to yourself could have been harmful to your unborn child. Yeah, I'm sorry. No worries. Talking doesn't necessarily solve everything, but it surely lightens the load. Still, this is quite the situation. Catherine looked really concerned, almost as if it was her own problem. Suddenly the doorbell rang, and without waiting for a response, Kenny entered. Both of us were taken aback, but Kenny acted like nothing was amiss and smiled. Rachel, I'm gonna help with your mom's care from today. You're not in the safe period yet, so I don't want you straining yourself. Kenny was putting on the act of a gentleman in front of me. Really? Okay, let me show you how to care for her. No, I'll learn from Catherine. You just rest at home. Well, my brother is coming home early today, so we won't need her help. Upon hearing that, Catherine looked at me, shaking her head as if to say it's okay. She might confront Kenny and get the full story out of him once I'm gone. Thinking that, I decided to leave it to her and head home. But I couldn't help but worry, so I pretended to leave, but hid nearby. Catherine tried to start a conversation with Kenny, but he spoke first. I've been meaning to ask, why are you taking care of your mother-in-law in this house? He was using the same tone he used on the phone. Well, my husband is busy and can't make it, and Rachel has her job. But more importantly, why are you asking? Then Kenny exclaimed, what, and began to say horrible things to Catherine. You live in such a wealthy home. With enough money to put your mother-in-law in a care facility, wouldn't you? Or is it something else? Did your husband give up his claim to this family's wealth, so you're trying to curry favor by taking care of her? That must be it. You'd be pretty upset if you married into money and didn't get a piece of the inheritance, wouldn't you? That's just cruel. I, too, was so angered by Kenny's harsh words that I wanted to leave the room. However, as I was about to, Catherine, noticing me, signaled with her eyes not to. I reluctantly stayed quiet and just watched the scene unfold. You hit a nerve, didn't you? If so, leave right now. This family's wealth belongs to us, my wife and me. So, I'll take care of my mother-in-law by myself from now on. With that attitude from Kenny, Catherine felt it was pointless to say anything more and left the scene. I also discreetly stepped outside. She must have been deeply hurt. I wondered how I could apologize to her. Then Kenny began taking care of Mom all by himself. I offered to help, but Kenny told me I absolutely shouldn't come. He just explained the basics of caregiving. However, his careless caregiving had tragic consequences, and our mother passed away. The funeral was held at a church where generations of our family had been buried. However, from the day Mom passed away, Kenny disappeared. I tried to figure out where he might have gone, but with funeral preparations and other arrangements, I was too occupied. Relatives and neighbors seemed puzzled by Kenny's absence. Catherine, crying in front of the altar, apologized for entrusting Kenny with the caregiving. I approached the distraught Catherine and tried to console her. Catherine, please don't be so hard on yourself. It's our fault, not yours. No, Rachel, it's not your fault. But where on earth is that man? I wanted to give him a piece of my mind today, and he vanishes just as Mom passes away. Exactly. And wasn't Kenny often out, even while he was supposed to be caring for Mom? Where was he going? Yes, according to neighbors, Kenny frequently left the house. He was out so often it didn't seem like he was caregiving at all, more like he was just bumming around. Also, they mentioned a large truck had come by once. What was that truck about? I was curious, but with the funeral going on, I didn't bring it up to anyone. The funeral ended, and even after 3 days, Kenny hadn't returned. Then I got a call on my cell from Kenny. Hey, Rachel, I'm currently at a luxury hotel in Europe, the kind I saw on a travel show. Kenny's carefree voice came through. What? Kenny, you skipped Mom's funeral and you're doing what now? As I angrily yelled, an unexpected answer came from Kenny. I spent $200,000. $200,000? Where did you get that kind of money? Remember the grand piano at our family home? I sold it. Man, it was a good one. Who would have thought it would go for $200,000? Turns out, Kenny had sold the family's grand piano and was using that money to travel around Europe. That piano, which Mom said was a family heirloom, was indeed worth around $200,000. Apparently, the hotels Kenny booked were all quite luxurious, and he had quickly spent all the money. I never dreamed Kenny would do something like this while supposed to be taking care of Mom. Our family home had tight security, but with family, it's a different story. The truck that had been at our home must have been there to transport the piano. Why on earth are you doing something so selfish? The whole family was worried about you, since you weren't at the funeral. Well, you know, when you have a kid, you won't have much free time anymore. You have a job, so I guess I have to be the stay-at-home dad. I was flabbergasted by Kenny's words, forgetting my anger. It's good that he wants to take on child-rearing, but he seems intent on leeching off of me. Moreover, it appears Kenny mistakenly thought that the grand piano was mine. I confronted Kenny, who had unknowingly sold the grand piano and splurged with the money, with the words, "My condolences." Huh? What do you mean by that? With Kenny responding in a dumbfounded voice, I explained the details about the grand piano. That piano originally belonged to my grandfather, who bought it for my brother. So the current owner is still my brother? Oh, is that so? You scared me there. It'll be fine if I just apologize to your brother later, right? Kenny seemed to lack any guilt about selling someone else's belongings. Well, Kenny has only met my brother at our wedding, so it's understandable he's unaware of my brother's intimidating nature. My brother works as a piano teacher. Ever since he was a child, he loved the piano. He pleaded with our grandfather to buy that specific piano. Though currently, there isn't space in his house for it, which is why it's at our parents'. Yet, he's still the owner. While working at a piano school, he has also expressed his wish to start his own school, using that very piano. The piano means more to him than anything else. I can only imagine what kind of punishment he would impose on Kenny after hearing that it was sold without permission. By the way, my brother has a strong personality and hates dishonesty. As I continued explaining, Kenny remained silent throughout. Get it? When he finds out you sold his cherished grand piano, mere compensation won't cut it. My brother's not just strong-willed, but he doesn't settle for compromises either. I wonder what kind of punishment awaits you. With my warning, the phone abruptly hung up. He's probably feeling regretful and is now racking his brains. For now, I called my brother and told him everything about the phone call. Needless to say, he was livid. The next day, Kenny rushed home. Entering from the front door, his eyes widened, seeing everyone in the living room. What's going on? Why is everyone here? I had timed it so that the whole family would gather when Kenny returned home. Of course, my brother and his wife Catherine were there too. With a menacing look, my brother said, "Kenny, I heard everything from Rachel. What were you thinking? Selling someone else's property, especially something that valuable, without consulting the family." Kenny, visibly nervous, tried to justify himself. I was just trying to help with the chores around the house out of boredom. When I saw the old, large grand piano, I thought no one was using it anymore. So you decided to sell it? Yes, I mean, it seemed like a waste just to leave it there. My brother, with a stern expression, asked, "That piano was special, imported by our grandfather from a top European manufacturer. Where's the money from the sale?" As expected, my brother is quite the actor. Everyone probably knows that Kenny blew all his money on an overseas trip, but he's trying to make him confess it in front of everyone. Kenny must be desperately thinking of an excuse. He doesn't respond immediately and seems lost in thought. The sales money, yeah, it hasn't come in yet. In a flustered manner, Kenny tried to make an excuse, but my brother's anger finally erupted. "You're lying. Just how rotten are you? For starters, what's with those souvenirs from Europe in that huge suitcase?" Kenny acted as if he'd been struck by lightning, closing his eyes and shrinking back. I am sorry. I used up all the money. Hearing Kenny's words, all the relatives began murmuring. Everyone knows the value of that grand piano. Everyone was shocked that he could spend $200,000 on just one overseas trip. My brother, looking down at Kenny, lifted his chin with his hand, making eye contact, and said, I think you already know from Rachel, but that piano was mine. Now that it's gone, you're gonna pay back every single penny. If you can't, I'm gonna sue you for theft. Are you okay with that? My brother was confronting Kenny with immense intensity. He almost seemed like a mob boss. Normally this would just be a family dispute, not something to sue over. But my brother is probably intimidating Kenny, who is clueless about the law. Just as my brother expected, Kenny lost his voice and started sweating profusely. Then with a frightened voice, he looked at me. Rachel, please help me. He pleaded in such a pitiful voice. What does he expect me to do? I have nothing to do with this. It's all you're doing. When I shot him down, Kenny began saying something ridiculous. Don't be so cold. I took care of your mom while you were pregnant. I just thought of the trip as a reward for myself after taking care of her. Let's just say we both decided to sell the piano. That way, since we are siblings, it won't be theft, right? What? I was so dumbfounded I couldn't close my open mouth. The one who came to my rescue was Catherine. Enough is enough. Didn't you tell Rachel not to come for caregiving? You even told me you thought I was just after the inheritance and tried to drive me away. Kenny, did you say such awful things to my wife too? Yes. I didn't want to worry you, so I kept quiet. But this man must have been plotting to secretly sell the piano without letting Rachel and me get close to the family home. Catherine's words made sense to me. Recalling that Kenny didn't let me come close to the family home when he said he'd take care of our parents alone, I came to the same conclusion. My brother's anger peaked again. Listen up. The reason my wife took care of Mom was because she didn't want to go to a facility. My wife had experience caring for her own mother, so she kindly agreed to do it for mine. Money is a later issue. First, apologize to my wife right here, right now. While being grabbed by the collar by my brother, Kenny, with tears in his eyes, knelt down in front of Catherine. I'm so sorry, Catherine. Though Kenny apologized for his insulting behavior towards Catherine, all the relatives looked at him with cold eyes. Then one of the relatives shouted at Kenny, "You better pay back the money from the piano sale as soon as possible. We can't have a criminal in the family. It'll tarnish the Schneider's name." Kenny, misunderstanding again, made another odd remark. Right? We can't have a criminal in the family. Right, bro? So, let's keep things calm. We'll save money together as a couple and pay back little by little. At Kenny's nonsensical interpretation, even my uncle was left speechless, not knowing how to respond. I felt that no matter what was said, it wouldn't resolve anything. So I decided to fetch something from my room. Ever since the incident on the phone when Kenny was talking with a friend, I've had the business card of a divorce lawyer ready. Kenny, call this number. I want our relationship to be over. From now on, let's communicate through lawyers. When Kenny saw the business card I thrust at him, his face turned pale. Why? We're about to have a baby, and yet why are you doing this? At that moment, I told everyone present what Kenny had been talking about with his friend on the phone. Wait, you heard that? It was just a joke. Do you think that excuse will fly? I've known from the start that you approached me for my inheritance. Everyone around was giving Kenny a cold stare. Realizing that there was no way out, Kenny retorted with a defiant attitude. Darn! I thought I was going to get close to $9 million. After we got married, I researched how much your mother left you. Everyone was shocked by this sudden change in Kenny, who had always seemed so gentle. Maybe I should have been suspicious of a man I met at a dating event who was 10 years younger. I thought we had married for love, but this hurt me deeply. From now on, Kenny would be a stranger to me and my brother, so naturally, he had to pay back the money from selling the grand piano. Kenny broke down saying, "I can't do that." But all the relatives present would testify against him, so there was no escaping this. However, rest assured, I won't ask for child support. Really? Well, at least I'm grateful for that. In return, Kenny, you'll have nothing to do with this child. This is my child alone. You can't even claim to be its father. I firmly stated with my hand on my belly, so I can't even see the child. Of course not. Someone who deceives others for money doesn't deserve to be a father. Upon hearing this, Kenny looked devastated and collapsed. Since the divorce, Kenny had been living in poverty, working live-in jobs. One day my phone rang and it was Kenny. I didn't want to have anything to do with him, but he kept calling, so I reluctantly answered. "Rachel, please help me," Kenny pleaded in a pitiful voice. He explained that the buyer of the grand piano he sold wanted to return it and get a refund. When Kenny sold the piano, he had said it was in pristine condition. However, there was a large engraving on the back, made by my brother claiming ownership. Probably Kenny didn't check the back. He should have gone to a reputable piano buyer who would have checked it thoroughly. Kenny probably sold it through a shady dealer. He was likely lured in by tempting offers like completely free, and now he's facing the consequences. Kenny had to return $200,000 to the buyer. Considering what he owed my brother, it was a substantial amount. Later on, Kenny tried to file for bankruptcy, but my brother and I took legal action and stopped him. Now, Kenny is burdened with even more debt and works day and night doing manual labor. Eventually, the heirloom grand piano safely returned. Relieved, my brother put a strong lock on the room where the piano was kept. He even installed a security camera, being super cautious. "No one's gonna touch that piano till I start my piano lessons," said my brother, who hadn't changed a bit from when he was a kid, making me chuckle. My brother expressed his wish to start a piano school at our family home, so I decided to discuss sharing our mother's inheritance. Catherine, my brother's wife, had taken care of our mother, and I felt guilty about inheriting everything by myself. Thanks to my brother agreeing with my decision, it seems we'll continue to have a good relationship with his family in the future. And so I was blessed with a child, a long-awaited baby girl. I feel bad for the relatives who were hoping for an heir, but in today's age, I believe girls tend to cherish their mothers for a longer time. Besides, my mother, in fact, was an only daughter and took in a son-in-law, so if needed, my daughter can do the same. I became a single mom, but Catherine, who's already done with her parenting, is fully supporting me. Ever since I was taking care of my mom, I've truly been indebted to Catherine. My brother said he's going to step in as a father figure for my daughter, and he's really excited about it. Also, my brother and Catherine have 2 adult daughters, and under his influence, who loves the piano, both became kindergarten teachers. Those nieces have also come to adore my daughter. I feel so fortunate to be supported by such a warm family. And with gratitude to those around me, I intend to live strong with my daughter. A sudden spike in the electricity bill. In a rush, I called the power company. An employee comes over and with a puzzled look says, "Did you notice this wire before?" When Bob and I rush over, the employee gently moves a potted plant nearby to give us a clearer view. From our outdoor outlet, a strange wire extended, leading towards my in-laws' house. "Do you know anything about this wire?" Bob and I exchange glances at the employee's question. We're probably both thinking the same thing. "Hey Bob, could this be—" "Yeah, no doubt about it. This is why our electric bill went through the roof." Bob almost instinctively reaches for the outlet and swiftly unplugs the wire. The very next moment, a sharp scream echoes from my in-laws' direction. "What?" "It's probably my mother-in-law's." Soon after, I hear some hysterical muttering. The voice grows louder, coming from behind their door and heading our way. Suddenly, my mother-in-law bursts out from the bushes. "My name is Mary Johnson, a 32-year-old stay-at-home mom. My hobby is trying out limited-time desserts. I always gather information about desserts, either through friends or by doing my own research. Bob, my kind husband, always supports my hobbies. I've known Bob, who's the same age as me, since college. From the time we met up until now, I've always adored his consistent kindness. By the way, I also had a deep fondness for my in-laws, who raised such a wonderful man. Many of my married friends often complain about issues with their mothers-in-law. I've even heard stories about marriages ending due to issues with their mothers-in-law. But thankfully, such tales have nothing to do with our household. My mother-in-law, like me, is a fan of desserts. Whenever I bring her a recommended treat, she's always grateful and appreciative. She's always delighted. And my father-in-law, though a man of few words, always has a reassuring smile. Both of them have always been fond of me, and I've felt the same about them. My in-laws currently live about a 30-minute drive away. Not too close, but not too far either. Just the right distance. But sometimes I wonder, with the two of them, maybe we could live together. It's not that I want to live together, but perhaps we might get along better than expected. I adored them enough to even entertain such thoughts. However, I'd come to realize that life isn't always that sweet. One day I was thrown off by the news I got from Bob. What, your parents? Turns out my in-laws were moving into the vacant house next door. I had always assumed they owned their place, but it seems they were actually renting. Their house had gotten old, so it appears they were considering moving. When they found out about the empty house next to ours, they jumped on the opportunity. It was a sudden short-distance move. I was immediately consumed by anxiety. Up until now, I've gotten along with my in-laws without any issues. I wonder if it'll be okay. Living next door means that if we're up for it, we can see each other every day. I do like my in-laws, but to be honest, seeing them daily is a bit much. But it's not like I can suddenly say that it's too close and not to move here. Actually, when we heard about the move, Bob gently advised his parents. Maybe you shouldn't. But they didn't want to hear it, saying, we get along so well now, it'll be fine. I thought we could even live together. I want to smack my overly optimistic self for thinking that way. As my anxiety grew, my in-laws moved in. We greeted them cautiously, but at first things seemed okay. We maintained a good distance and set some boundaries. But as they started to feel more at home, my mother-in-law began to push boundaries like never before. She was acting out every single don't do this behavior you hear about in the grapevine. Dropping by without calling ahead became her usual, and once she was in, she'd act like it was her own house. And not only that, it was like they were checking our every move. Then on the day my mother-in-law paid an unannounced visit and checked on our dinner, she said something outrageous. Hey Mary, I've been thinking maybe you could stop locking the door. What? I couldn't believe my ears. Can you believe it? In this day and age, my mother-in-law is suggesting I leave our house unlocked. Not locking the door means not knowing who could walk in at any time. That's just not comforting. It's obviously a bad idea. Ever since my mother-in-law moved in nearby, even the thought of it makes me anxious. Even the doorbell ringing makes my heart race. Now there's the possibility she could just walk into our home without us even knowing. I'm certainly not okay with that. With how things are lately, I have to admit, not locking the door feels kind of scary. Trying to keep things light, I declined with a smile. But she frowned and replied, "Oh Mary, you're such a worrier. But don't fret, I'll tell our neighbors to look out for you. And don't forget, your father-in-law and I are here too. We'll be popping in frequently." I understand her words come from a good place, and I appreciate that. That's why I couldn't bring myself to tell her how burdensome her frequent visits had become. But everyone has their limits. Last week, it felt like she had perfect attendance at our home. I have tea with my mother-in-law at our home every day. Naturally, spending this much time together, it's no wonder some grievances arise. I've come to truly understand that a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law relationship is all about finding the right balance. She would leave unnecessary potted plants in our yard or plant flowers without asking. It's like she does whatever she wants now. If it was once every few months, I could tolerate it, but every day is a different story. Since the incident with the door, she's brought it up several times. I managed to convince her by saying I was just a wife with strong security concerns. However, with that settled, my mother-in-law then started pleading, I'd like a spare key. I knew I had to get Bob to refuse her request. Handing such a powerful item to her now is just out of the question. Though I found myself at odds with how she behaves, I didn't quite dislike her. She can be meddlesome, but I know it comes from my mother-in-law's good intentions. Rather, I felt more guilt for rejecting her than anything else. But as time passed, those feelings began to change. Whether it was me changing, my mother-in-law changing, or both, I can't be sure. However, I started to feel discomfort and irritation with her comments. It was a few months after she moved in. By then, it had become a routine for my mother-in-law to visit after lunch. I once asked about my father-in-law, and it seems he usually goes for walks or shopping alone. I suggested she should join him, but she declined, saying walking tires me out. Lately, she's become a typical mother-in-law. Previously, when I made her tea, she'd just say thank you, but now there's always a comment like, it's lukewarm or it's weak. Whenever she speaks, it's either gossip or bad-mouthing someone. Being around her just brings me down. But I can't exactly reject her, so I just nod and listen. I just nod and force a smile. It's just not good, right? The grass keeps growing and they never cut it. I've even thought about mowing it myself. Today my mother-in-law was fervently discussing a neighbor's consistently neglected yard. So I was saying, oh, when my mother-in-law suddenly stopped talking, I instinctively followed her gaze to the bookshelf. Did she find a book that piqued her interest? It'd be peaceful if we could just read together. Did you find a book you're interested in? As I was about to approach the bookshelf, she reached past it, grabbing something from the rack next to it. Susan, you shouldn't touch that. Upon seeing what she took, I hastily reached out, but she just innocently opened it. And then she exclaimed with delight, "Oh my! Mary dear, oh dear, didn't you overspend last month? Goodness, your electricity bill is twice as much as ours." What my mother-in-law was looking at, as if she were reading a weekly magazine, was our household account book. "Stop, give it back." When I hurriedly snatched it away, my mother-in-law laughed softly. "You really don't have to be so flustered." "But, Mary, it seems like you're not so good at saving money. Bob must feel bad having a wife who struggles with budgeting. You should try a bit harder, okay?" I could feel my face heat up. Both the front and back covers clearly stated the household account book. Still, she took the plunge and opened someone else's household account book. I couldn't believe it. And about those desserts, I have a soft spot for limited edition treats too, so I get the urge. But if you can't even save a dime, do you think you really deserve to indulge in sweets? Furthermore, my mother-in-law kept on nagging, saying things like, "You spend way too much on food, and the electricity bill is outrageous." On top of that, she boasted about how frugal she was. After ranting for a while, she seemed satisfied and left. After my mother-in-law left, I was so moved that I couldn't stop crying. The accumulated stress might have played a part too. I've reached my breaking point. I cried nonstop until Bob came home. You don't have to take Mom's word for it, but I think it's easier said than done. I'm really sorry. I'll tell Mom not to come again. Yeah, please. Bob comforted me, and after I calmed down a bit, I decided to discuss something that had been bothering me. It was about the electricity bill. As my mother-in-law pointed out, it was high. Without any significant changes in our usage, it had skyrocketed over the past few months. I was concerned about it, but dealing with my mother-in-law's constant nagging and criticism was taking a toll on me. My mother-in-law had left me little time to think about anything else. Bob looked at the electricity bill details, puzzled. This was definitely strange. I know, right? The next bill is coming soon, isn't it? If it seems off, we should give the electric company a call. A few days later, a bill arrived, charging us an astonishing $1,300, more than double our usual amount. Feeling that something was amiss, we quickly decided to have someone from the electric company come over. The technician took a detailed look around and then pointed out something peculiar, calling us over. "Did you know about this wire?" he asked. As Bob and I approached, the technician gently moved a potted plant to make it visible to us. It had been hidden by the long leaves, but there was an external outlet there. We had forgotten about it since we had never used it since building the house. From that outlet, as the technician mentioned, a wire extended leading towards my in-laws' house. "Do you know anything about this wire?" Bob and I exchanged glances, both likely thinking the same thing. "Hey Bob, could this be it?" "Yeah, no doubt about it. This is the reason our electric bills shot up," Bob replied. To be sure, we followed the wire with the technician, pushing through bushes and tall weeds. Sure enough, the wire led to my in-laws' storage shed. We couldn't see where it connected from here, but it was clear that it had something to do with the in-laws' house. The technician with a stern look asked, "Do you want me to call the police?" "No, we might have to, but let's talk it out first." This house belongs to our parents after all, I said. The worker initially looked tense, suspecting theft of electricity, but upon realizing it was a family home, his expression softened with relief. Oh, I see. I'll be on my way then, he said. Yes, thank you for taking the time to come out here. We really appreciate it. We walked him out to his vehicle and saw him off. After he left, we turned to each other, deep in thought. Bob sighed heavily, cradling his head in his hands. I'm sorry for having a mother like that, he said. It's hard to say, don't worry about it. What are we gonna do next? If it's like any other day, Bob's parents are probably home right now. Should we confront them directly, or come up with a plan first? Bob, with his hand covering his mouth, started walking towards the external outlet. Thanks to the employee who had moved the potted plant aside earlier, the outlet was clearly visible. Come to think of it, perhaps his mother purposefully placed the potted plant here to hide this outlet, I thought to myself, though I hated to suspect. I couldn't think of any other reason. I wonder what this is connected to. Suddenly, Bob reached out and swiftly unplugged the wire. Wait, is it okay to unplug that? I just unplugged it. Thinking of them calmly stealing our electricity all this time makes me so angry. Anyway, we have the employee as a witness. I won't let them make any lame excuses. If need be, we have that as well. That's true. I nodded in agreement, when suddenly a high-pitched scream rang out from Bob's parents' house. Probably my mother-in-law's. Moments later, hysterical muttering was heard. The voices came out of their door and started heading in our direction. And then, with great momentum, mother-in-law burst out from behind the hedge. She must not have expected anyone to be there. When mother-in-law saw us, she let out a deeply surprised voice. No, I'm surprised. You guys, what are you doing in a place like that? She snapped at us, so I puffed up my chest and responded, Susan, do you have some business in our yard? You seemed pretty flustered, didn't you? Well, that's... She looked away, visibly uncomfortable. Beyond her, Bob was holding on to the removed wire firmly. When my mother-in-law exclaimed, "Oh!" she tried to snatch it from Bob's hand. Bob twisted away, hiding the wire behind his back. Hey! What are you doing? No, that's what I should be asking you. Bob thrust the wire in front of her face and said in a deep, serious voice, "This was plugged into our outlet, you know?" Emphasizing the R, my mother-in-law's eyes darted around for a moment. Then she looked upwards, defensively. So what? Do you know where this wire goes? I have no idea. Just plug it back in now? Things are a mess here since you pulled it out. How can she ask to plug it in without even knowing where it's connected to? Plus, she's basically admitting she suffered because it was unplugged. It's almost like she's confessing that she did it. But my mother-in-law didn't seem the least bit guilty. She was just completely panicked. I knew why she was so flustered. Standing next to Bob, I smiled reassuringly. Susan, please calm down. How can we plug in a wire when we don't know where it leads? This is our outlet, isn't it? It's no big deal to plug it in. It's just for a moment. So please remember what you told us about being careful with the electricity. Remember what you told me? Not to waste even a bit of electricity. Saying how Bob was unfortunate to have a wife who couldn't even save on electricity. Well, that was when she started to fidget. I won't make it in time, I heard her mutter under her breath. She seemed on the verge of panicking. What time is it now? Well, it's 9:57. Oh no, I'm done for. After that exclamation, the mother-in-law stumbled all the way and hurriedly left. Bob was puzzled by his mother-in-law's strange behavior, and I knew the reason behind it. I whispered to Bob, huh? Is that what you mean? So, if we keep hanging around like this, she'll show up again? That's right. Bob tossed the wire aside and we headed back inside the house. A short while later, I heard a rattling sound at the front door, followed by the doorbell ringing. This is my mother-in-law, I thought as I unlocked the door and opened it. Hello, Susan. Continuing from what I said earlier, enough of your chatter. Move over. As soon as the door opened, my mother-in-law pushed me aside and entered. She was visibly upset. Her footsteps thundered like a monster's as she made her way to the living room, and then heavily flopped onto the sofa. Bob, who was in the living room, furrowed his brows with a puzzled expression and was about to speak, but my mother-in-law was a tad quicker. Oh, I'm parched. Hey, is the tea not ready yet? You're so slow. Act before being told. That's basic etiquette, right? Yes. And another thing, why do you always lock the door? Everyone in the neighborhood says I have a cold daughter-in-law. There's nothing worth stealing in this house anyway. It's just so pretentious. It's annoying. What? She continued to grumble. Oh, this is hopeless. I can't stand it anymore. I grabbed the half-drunk plastic bottle nearby and slammed it down on the table in front of my mother-in-law. She sat there, her eyes wide and frozen in shock. Here you are, your water. And you said there's nothing worth stealing in this house. But sadly, there are greedy and sneaky people out there. For example, people who sneakily steal electricity. I could see the panic on my mother-in-law's face. I sat right next to her. My mother-in-law didn't have the courage to look at me, even though I was right next to her. She stared ahead, her face pale. Mary, what's wrong? You don't seem like yourself. Really, Susan? Even I have my limits. Did you think I was a god or something? I tried to lighten the mood with jokes, but she was not amused. As frightened as if she had seen a demon, my mother-in-law asked Bob for help, but he just shook his head. Next to her was her daughter-in-law, who turned into a demon, and a few feet away was Bob, who was unwilling to help her. Given the circumstances, my mother-in-law's next move was predictable. I'm sorry. I remembered that I have something to do, so I'm gonna go. You're not going anywhere, are you? I pushed my mother-in-law's shoulder hard as she tried to get up from the couch. Her back sank deep into the sofa. Mary, I really need to. You were the one who said you were thirsty, weren't you? You made such a fuss, and now you say you can't drink water. That's pretty hypocritical, don't you think? Tears filled her eyes as she reached for her bottle, but this time, Bob stopped her. My mother-in-law seemed relieved for a moment, but she didn't want me to drink the leftover. The real problem begins now. When did you start stealing our electricity? You often accuse me of stealing. That's a terrible thing to say. But the wire that's plugged into my outlet actually comes from your house, right? My mother-in-law couldn't come up with a good excuse, and she opened and closed her mouth several times, wondering if she could somehow bluff her way out of the situation. To be honest, she has no way out of this situation. Is she stupid? I thought to myself, all she has to do now is admit it and apologize. But it seemed like fate had thrown my mother-in-law a lifeline. The doorbell rang, and when I went to see it, it was my father-in-law. Is Susan here? Apparently, my father-in-law had gone out for a bit of shopping. When he returned home, the front door was not locked and the TV was still on, but his wife was nowhere to be seen. He must have been worried. David. Seeing her lifeline, my mother-in-law ran to him, tears streaming down her face. My father-in-law seemed quite embarrassed by his wife's distraught appearance. That's when Bob stepped in and explained everything from the start. After thinking for a while, he began to speak slowly. Isn't there some kind of mistake? Of course, he would find it hard to believe that his own wife had been secretly stealing electricity from their son's house. Then who did the wiring? Do you think a complete stranger would go through the trouble of connecting someone else's wiring to another person's house? My father-in-law crossed his arms and was deep in thought. He nodded and said, "Let's go and have a look first," and stood up. But my mother-in-law exclaimed, clearly flustered and trying to intervene. However, my father-in-law asked Bob to show him what was happening and walked towards the power outlet. The wiring seemed to trail off into a storage shed and couldn't be seen from where they were. When my father-in-law investigated and returned, the color had drained from his face. "I'm so sorry. Truly am." Apologized to them. Now? And my mother-in-law was like, "I'm sorry?" Just like a child. My father-in-law said the wires went to the battery and were connected to my mother-in-law's computer via an extension cord. The battery was purchased when she moved to a new house, not only during emergencies, but apparently a salesman told her that it's cost-effective to store electricity during the cheaper nighttime hours and then use it during the day. And my mother-in-law actually did it. She used the house's electrical outlet to store electricity at night and used it in her home during the day. At first, that was all she did. But her extension cord had an unused socket, so she apparently started plugging in her computer and other home appliances. Eventually, she started receiving electricity from our house all day, not just at night. My mother-in-law justified her actions by saying, "I heard it was more economical." Naturally, I was annoyed that she was stealing the electricity without permission. But what made me even more angry was that despite my mother-in-law's constant criticism and belittling towards me, she was lying the entire time. "You often said how Bob is so unlucky to have a wife who can't save money, and how I buy sweets but can't even save a dime, didn't you?" "That's true, isn't it?" Her lack of remorse was considerable. "Just saving money on your electricity bill by using someone else's electricity doesn't mean you're saving money. That's just theft." I continued further. "And just so you know, I won't let this slide just because we're family. If you don't sincerely apologize, we'll have no choice but to involve the police." My mother-in-law looked surprised for some reason. Did she think she could pull it off? "What a wife you are. Are you saying that you would betray me, your own family? Don't twist things. We're a family, and we just want to make sure things are right." When I took out my phone, she panicked and rushed towards me. Bob immediately stopped her. "Evidence? You have no evidence. With all this evidence, do we need more? If so, let us provide you with something more conclusive." I pointed towards the roof. My mother-in-law strained her eyes to see. Then her face paled. Yes, our house had security cameras installed. By sheer coincidence, the area around the outlet was within the camera's range. My mother-in-law let out a soft "ah" in distress. "Is this enough proof? Oh, one more thing. Is there more? Today was the release date for the limited edition dessert, so you were in a really big hurry." "We were in a hurry, right?" "No way." I flashed her a cheeky smile. "Yes, I had a friend buy it for me, so I was able to secure it safely. If you hadn't been so obsessed with siphoning electricity, you might have been able to buy it online." What a shame. My mother-in-law fell to the ground, trembling and helpless. After talking with Bob, we decided not to report my mother-in-law to the police. She admitted her wrongdoing, and we had evidence, but it was more troublesome than anything. And since she was our family, there was a chance that it would be ignored. Instead, we decided to have my in-laws pay for the electricity used and provide additional compensation for the inconvenience. Living in close quarters meant things were bound to get awkward, but that determination was necessary for my peace of mind. My in-laws seemed to feel the tension as our interactions decreased. One day, we received some happy news. They were returning to their old house. Apparently, rumors of electricity theft were being spread, especially about my parents-in-law, and my mother-in-law was upset and started crying. She said she wanted to go back to her previous house. By the way, I thought that my mother-in-law had good relations with her neighbors, but it turns out that she did not. She was just being treated like a fragile object. After paying us and the moving expenses, my in-laws were left lamenting that they were out of money. However, we are absolutely not going to help them out. I hope they cut back on their beloved sweets and manage on their own. On the other hand, now that my mother-in-law is gone, I have been living life to the fullest, every single day. Our electric bill has significantly reduced, and I am currently debating which dessert to treat myself to next. "You're just trying to hog all the money, aren't you?" My mother-in-law would say. "You're such a heartless daughter-in-law." I was worn out by her constant requests for money. No matter how patiently and thoroughly I explained the situation, she wouldn't listen. She kept pestering me with calls whenever the amount wasn't to her liking, and I eventually caved in. My name is Katherine Johnson, a 31-year-old working housewife. I work alongside my husband Bob, as we both have full-time jobs. We share household chores and live busy yet fulfilling lives. We met through a mutual friend and got along right away, which led to us dating. After being together for about 3 years, we found that our values and preferences aligned, making it easy to spend time together. While dating, we lived together and felt very comfortable, leading us to decide to marry. Thinking we could build a happy home together, despite the hopeful start, issues arose quite soon. 2 years into our marriage, things between Bob and I were smooth. The problem was with my mother-in-law. Thinking of starting a family, I wanted a child. However, due to uncertainties caused by my mother-in-law, I was hesitant. The first time I met her was when Bob and I visited her for the customary pre-marriage introduction. At that time, My father-in-law had just passed away, and she was living alone. According to Bob, she was a responsible mother. She was a stay-at-home mom, and Bob has fond memories of cooking and crafting with her. She praised when it was due and scolded when necessary, seeming to be a mother who truly cared for her child. I was nervous knowing she was Bob's family. Moreover, Bob was an only child, and with the recent passing of his father, I thought she might be emotionally unstable. I was concerned that she might be harsh towards me. When we finally met, she did seem wary of me. Her face looked somewhat tense as she observed me. After I introduced myself, she scrutinized me and posed a slightly sharp question. "Oh, you seem rather plain. Do you have a stable job? You're not planning on just relying on my son and being lazy, are you?" It was ironic, coming from a housewife, and her tone felt hostile towards me. Still, I thought she might be concerned about her only son and felt lonely because of the marriage, so I decided not to let it bother me. "Mom, that's rude. Don't say things like that," I said, trying to defuse the situation. However, Bob was angered by his mother's attitude, which escalated into a heated argument. "Please calm down," I tried to mediate between them, taking into account my first meeting with her. But even after things cooled down, the visit ended on a somewhat sour note. I was worried, seeing my mother-in-law's demeanor. Still, I thought there was no need to force a close relationship, and since we weren't going to live together, I remained optimistic. Given the significant distance between our residences, I hoped we could at least occasionally meet and maintain a cordial relationship. Trusting that Bob would support me, I was relaxed about my mother-in-law at this point. However, after returning to our apartment where we lived together, Bob confessed that he had been sending money to his mother. I should have told you sooner, but the thing is, she had never worked, being a housewife all her life. With the father-in-law around, this was never a problem. But after his passing, she began asking for financial help. She wasn't of retirement age yet, and even with the inheritance from her late husband, she could probably sustain her lifestyle for a few more years at most. Being fond of shopping, if she continued living as she did when her husband was alive, her savings wouldn't last a year. I didn't realize until now, but my mother-in-law isn't good with money. It seems Dad managed things before. When her husband was alive, he strictly managed their finances, and she used money responsibly under his guidance. But now on her own, Bob feels uneasy about her spending habits. Considering they had been together for over 20 years, he initially thought he might be overly worried. Also, since Bob had already moved out and given her good health, despite her lack of work experience, he assumed she would manage somehow. However, up until now, she had been leading a comfortable life, so I reckon my mother-in-law must find it tough to suddenly change her lifestyle, and it naturally worries me. Besides, she lost her husband, who she had been with for a long time, and the thought of her getting sick because of that really concerns me. I always thought parents would be fine, but my father had also warned me, and apparently, in the beginning, I was constantly chiming in and helping my mother-in-law adjust to her life. But my husband also has work, so he barely has time to attend to my mother-in-law. Traveling back and forth from our home to our hometown was quite the ordeal, since it's a considerable distance. Plus, my mother-in-law would pester us about sending more money, insisting that as long as she gets her allowance, everything's okay, leading us to eventually surrender and send her $1,500 a month. "Lal, you're not sending her that much just because she's unwell, are you?" The amount he was sending was way more than I imagined, and I couldn't help but blurt out my surprise. I felt that just because she's family, that doesn't mean we should give her that much money. I don't want to put any burden on my mom, and I definitely don't want to inconvenience her, my husband reasoned. Apart from his regular job, my husband also earns from his blog, so we have some financial cushion. He started the blog during his college days when he had some free time, and by the time he graduated, he was already making as much as a typical office worker. Later on, he got a job at a company that allowed side hustles. So even now, while focusing on his main job, he still runs his blog, earning even more than he did in college, which has led to a comfortable savings and income situation. Sending $1,500 a month would still be manageable, even if our family grew in the future. I also understand my husband's concerns about his mother living alone, so I am okay with the allowance to her. With that settled, we tied the knot without any issues. But not long after we got married, I received a call on my smartphone from my mother-in-law. Curious about what she wanted, I answered, only to find out she was asking me to also contribute to her allowance. Bob has been sending money, right? We can't spare any more than what we're currently giving. I wondered why she was asking me as well when we were already sending $1,500, and even though she's my mother-in-law, I firmly declined. You both work and have some financial flexibility, right? I'm really gonna be in a bind without a bit more money. Receiving $1,500 a month and still saying it's not enough seemed unreasonable to me. She should have more than enough to live on with that, and I felt no obligation to send her any money. She sounded desperate and weak, but no matter how many times she asked, I politely declined. But she was relentless, and her tone gradually became harsher and more demanding. You married into our family, so you have a duty to support me. You work, you have the means. Do you even care what happens to me? We're already sending $1,500, you know. It's not easy to make that kind of money. Asking for more is just not possible. But the money I earned was for my husband and our future family. I'd only spend for the in-laws if it were a real emergency. From what my husband had told me, her current situation wasn't desperate at all. I tried my best to decline, but her screaming was making my head spin. After a long day at work, her barrage of verbal abuse was mentally exhausting. Wanting to end the call, my fatigue clouded my judgment, and I eventually agreed to contribute. All right, I can do $200. I thought I was being quite generous, but she complained. What? Just that? You're so stingy. I don't understand why Bob married someone like you. I initially offered a smaller amount, but after her persistent complaints and whining, I eventually agreed to $500. And once she knew she was getting an extra $500, she hung up without even thanking me. Exhausted and flabbergasted, I let out a deep sigh. I discussed this matter with my husband that very day. I'm really sorry about my mom. I can't believe she said that to Catherine. Bob looked genuinely remorseful as he apologized. He mentioned that he would tell his mother-in-law not to ask me for money anymore, but I insisted on providing it anyway. It's okay. Besides, even if I refuse now, she will probably keep pestering me for it. I did make a promise, after all. My mother-in-law's demands over the phone were intense, and I honestly wanted to avoid any interaction with her as much as possible. If paying would bring some peace, then so be it. Fortunately, Bob and I had started a blog together while dating, and it was making enough money. Even if we added $500 to the allowance, it wouldn't affect our daily life. I'm sorry for causing trouble. Mom wasn't always like this. Bob apologized again. With a weary look, even as I tried to brush it off. Just when I thought the money issue with my mother-in-law had ended, 6 months into our marriage, she contacted us again wanting more money. She had developed problems with her legs and eyes, and now had medical bills. My legs aren't working right, and my eyes need treatment. I can't work, so I need more money from you, she said. At this point, we had become suspicious of her spending habits. But upon visiting her, it became clear she truly needed financial help. Still, she kept insisting on just getting the money from us, which made us uneasy. So we were planning on taking care of the necessary procedures and transfers, but my mother-in-law strongly objected. I can manage things myself, if you just give me the money. So please, increase the amount you send, she pleaded. She then requested a whopping $5,000, which we flatly refused. There's no way your medical and living expenses are that high. If we take care of the necessities, our current contributions should suffice, we explained. Even if we had a decent income, giving her $5,000 monthly would stretch us thin. Moreover, $300 a month should be more than enough for her medical needs. She was asking for way too much. From the beginning of our marriage, it was evident she had a penchant for money. Now it felt like she had an obsession. It was almost maddening. We couldn't keep sending money her way without conditions. We tried to explain how difficult it was for us to earn that kind of money, and how it would strain our lives. We even offered to guide her on managing her finances better. However, she barely listened and remained stubborn. I want to have extra just in case. With my bad legs, I might need care and I want to be prepared, she insisted. While she had a point, trusting her with such a large sum made us nervous. If you ever need care, just tell us, and we'll help you out, we reassured her. But she kept on about wanting more money. You two won't be around immediately if something happens. If I have the money, I can manage on my own, she argued. Negotiations at her place led nowhere. She was relentless, calling dozens of times a day, making most of our call logs from her. We couldn't even notice calls from work or friends anymore. After much persuasion, we eventually gave in and increased the allowance. Once we did, the calls stopped. And for the sake of peace, we deemed it a necessary sacrifice. Now, 2 years into our marriage, we are sending her $5,000 every month. While the monthly expense hurts, our income had increased since then. Just when we started considering having kids, tragedy struck. Bob was involved in a car accident while at work and had to be hospitalized. It was touch and go for a while, but with treatment, he stabilized. Thankfully, workers' compensation covered most of the hospital bills. However, Bob was on medical leave, affecting our income. To continue sending money to his mother, we would have to dip into our savings. Given Bob's condition, it seemed nearly impossible to continue providing the allowance for his mother. We informed her about Bob's accident and explained that due to the medical bills and his absence from work, we couldn't provide the allowance. Bob had an accident and is hospitalized. His injuries are severe and the treatments are expensive, so we won't be able to send money until he is discharged. Considering we have been sending her a generous amount, she should be able to manage for a few months. My mother-in-law always wants money, but I thought she would understand this time since my son had a serious accident. I was hoping that if I continued to send her money in the future, she would be considerate and ask for a modest amount so as not to trouble our son. However, my expectations were dashed. What? No money? I can't live without it. Instead of worrying about her injured grandson, my mother-in-law seemed more concerned about herself. This left me feeling quite frustrated. Anyone would normally be concerned about a grandson who has had a major accident. I have never trusted my mother-in-law's spending habits, but I believed she had love for her family. Now I am starting to doubt even that. Bob really had a bad accident. He can't work, so there is no income. Plus, the hospital bills are high, so I can't send you $5,000 this time. I tried to explain our situation to her as calmly as possible, but she got hysterical, demanding that I wire her the $5,000 immediately. No matter what I said, she wouldn't listen. Exhausted and dealing with Bob's accident and hospitalization, I decided to just send her the money to avoid further stress. But honestly, my mother-in-law seems to be getting worse every year. I never imagined she wouldn't be concerned about her own son. With the financial strain and concerns about my mother-in-law's behavior, I decided to discuss the matter with Bob once he stabilized. By then, Bob had been in the hospital for a month. He was still immobilized by his injuries, but he could talk to visitors. Even when I told my mother-in-law she could visit, she never did. However, my own parents, who live much farther away, came to visit Bob as soon as they heard. Seeing my parents visit while his own mother didn't made Bob quite sad. I'm really sorry about my mom. I can't believe she's like this. Bob remembered his mother being more considerate in the past, and he seemed deeply disappointed. With the stress from his injuries, he looked even more worn out. Your mom seems to take the money for granted. If this continues, we're really gonna be in a bind. Up until now, I had been patient since she's Bob's mother, but I've reached my limit and voiced my frustrations to Bob. It's not just about the money. Given how she's been acting, I wouldn't want her around our kids, if we ever have any. Seeing my distress, Bob made a determined face and made a suggestion. My mom's behavior is really off. How about we test her? Test her? Sal? I would normally decline such an idea, but given how much trouble we've had with my mother-in-law, I decided to go along with Bob's plan. Eventually, after 3 months, Bob was discharged from the hospital. We didn't tell my mother-in-law since she never visited during those 3 months. Bob was home but not fully recovered. As we were relaxing, a call came in from my mother-in-law. I figured she was probably calling about the money. Seeing her name on the caller ID, I felt a mix of frustration and dread. But this was the perfect time to execute our plan. Bob and I exchanged glances, nodded, and put the call on speaker. As expected, my mother-in-law's first words were about money. "Hey, where's this month's money? Send it now?" To execute our plan, I responded with a heavy tone. "I can't send you money anymore. Your son has passed away." This was Bob's idea, the playing dead strategy. It's a last resort and quite distasteful, but my mother-in-law's behavior was too much to handle, so I lied and told her Bob had died. We wanted to gauge her reaction to decide on future financial support. I've given up on expecting anything from my mother-in-law, but Bob still hoped she would care more about her son than the money. Sadly, reality proved otherwise. After a brief silence, she shockingly sounded pleased. "So, him passing away means that I'll get a piece of my son's inheritance, huh?" When I heard he was hospitalized, I looked into the inheritance and found out that I have a share too. "Catherine, I won't let you hog all the inheritance, you know." I couldn't believe that upon hearing about our son's serious injury and hospitalization, the first thing she checked was the inheritance share. Even I was lost for words at my mother-in-law's reaction. It was beyond unexpected. My husband was so shocked by his mother's words, his face became expressionless, looking like a stone mask. We never imagined our mother-in-law would act this way. My husband and I were both taken aback. "You do realize that your child passed away, right? Aren't you sad?" I couldn't help but ask in a shaky voice, but all she seemed to care about was the money. I told her I'd never send her money again, and that she won't get a cent from the inheritance, and hung up the phone. I don't want anything to do with her anymore. I always thought she was my only mother, but I've decided to cut ties with her. My husband murmured that quietly. He had been silently listening to the phone call and had made up his mind to cut ties with his mother. After that, we kept receiving persistent messages from her, but we ignored them all. The messages were always about money, and never once mentioned my husband. When your child passes away, isn't the funeral the first thing you'd ask about? I was increasingly baffled by my mother-in-law's way of thinking. She's become completely obsessed with money. If she can't reach us, she'll probably come to our house. We quickly prepared for her possible visit. And sure enough, a few days later, as expected, my mother-in-law showed up. My husband hid in a room, and I confronted her. She never once visited him when he was alive, but as soon as money is involved, she comes running. I was dumbfounded, but I quickly switched gears, pretending to be the grieving wife, and dealt with her. The moment I opened the door, "You're here shouting about the inheritance, and you've been ignoring all my calls. What kind of daughter-in-law are you?" She started yelling the moment the door was opened. "Aren't you sad that your son passed away? You never even visited him once." I tried to reason with her as we moved to the living room, putting on a sad face. "Why should I visit? It's not like it would change anything. My livelihood is at stake here. Obviously, money for my future is more important than someone who's already gone." But she was still fixated on the money. "Don't you care about your son?" When we first got married, she seemed to care about my husband. But in response to my question, she insisted that money was more important. "I've heard enough. It's clear that money is more important to you." My husband came out of the room he was hiding in, and she screamed in surprise, thinking he was a ghost. "Why are you alive? Did you lie about being dead?" She was furious at the supposed lie, but we weren't going to take that from her. "To think you could say something like that after hearing your son was dead. I understand now how you think. We won't be sending you any more money, and we're cutting ties with you." My husband had made up his mind. Despite my husband's declaration, she kept making excuses, but his mind was made up. We both looked at her coldly, and she started to get angry. "If you cut ties with me, my debt collectors will come after you. If you don't want that, then just give me the money." "What debt?" My husband didn't seem to know either, and he pressed for an explanation. Turns out, my mother-in-law got addicted to slot machines and racked up debt, naming my husband as the cosigner without his knowledge. We knew she was reckless with money, but never expected she had debt. In a threatening tone, she said to us, "Kids should listen to their parents. If you understand, then give me money. But my husband's stance didn't change, responding calmly. Even if we give you money, you won't use it to pay off the debt. Get out of here now. With that, my husband kicked out the raging mother-in-law and locked the door. She caused a commotion outside for about 30 minutes, but then she seemed to give up and left. Afterward, we immediately moved to avoid any more interactions with her. Upon investigating the debt, we found out my husband never agreed to be a co-signer, so he had no obligation to repay. Turns out, right after we got married, when she first contacted me for financial support, she was already squandering money on slot machines. And when she had asked for more money, citing medical bills, she already had debt. The extra financial support we gave her wasn't saved or used for repayments. It was spent on slot machines, and her debt just kept increasing. Realizing this, my husband was relieved. He decided to cut ties with her. With our financial support gone and only her debt remaining, she had no choice but to work. Having been a housewife all her life, and with her problematic personality and mindset, it seemed quite challenging for her to start working. She's now working hard to repay her debt without even a minute to care about her appearance. Locals know about her recklessness with money and gossip about how she was disowned by her son because of it, making her life quite uncomfortable. After cutting ties, we were still in a position to get updates about her for a while, but after learning everything and completing our move, we blocked her number. Now we won't have to send her money or be mentally stressed by her constant calls. Moving to a new environment and not having to deal with her brought a sense of relief and removed our anxieties about the future. Maybe it's because the stress from my mother-in-law disappeared, but I soon found out I was pregnant. Now we look forward to our baby's birth and strive to ensure happiness for our family, living with a bright and hopeful heart. It's okay, she won't wake up for a while. There are 2 bedrooms in the suite, so there's no way she'll notice. Then we gotta have some fun. After enjoying a hotel dinner the night before our wedding, when I woke up from a deep sleep, my husband Bob was in the midst of a tryst with another woman, Kathy. Holding my aching head, I desperately tried to gather evidence. Learning that he had been cheating under the guise of working late and had left all the wedding preparations were a big deal to me, I felt like I could never forgive Bob for his carelessness. I knew that if I didn't speak up, the wedding and honeymoon would go by without this issue being addressed. I came up with a plan to embarrass Bob and his lover, and I followed through with it. My name is Catherine, and I am a 38-year-old public officer. Between work and home, the years flew by, and I didn't have many opportunities to meet someone. I used to complain about not having enough chances to meet someone I was interested in. However, a friend introduced me to a man named Bob. He asked me out on a date. To be honest, I didn't find him exceptionally handsome or my type, but I was drawn to his sincerity, and that led to our relationship. I thought that perhaps I wouldn't find anyone else who would love a woman like me who only commuted between work and home, so I wanted to cherish him for life. As Bob was considering marriage, we had already made all the reservations for the wedding venue and honeymoon. But what troubled me the most, and an event I'll never forget, was a hiccup with the reservations. Bob was careless with money and didn't prepare funds for payments on time, such as for the wedding venue or travel agency. He always had an excuse, and if I didn't remind him, he wouldn't do anything. I would often tell him, if you don't deposit money into the account, they won't be able to withdraw the payment. How many times do I have to remind you? But he would just brush it off and say he was busy. I would ask him why he didn't talk to me beforehand and consult with me, but he would always say he was swamped with work and didn't have time. Despite our occasional disagreements, we managed to make the preparations for the wedding. As the wedding date approached, the final stages of preparation for the ceremony and honeymoon became more intense. We had many interactions with the venue regarding guest lists, gifts, and menu checks. It was a lot of work. Sometimes we had to visit the venue for meetings, but these meetings often didn't go smoothly because Bob would cancel at the last minute, using work as an excuse. Originally, we were supposed to go to the wedding venue together and make decisions together, but it felt like I was making most of the decisions on my own. It was a bit lonely. I noticed that Bob had been working a lot of overtime lately and had many sudden work commitments, especially on the days we had planned to spend together. He would often come home late. When I asked him about it, he would say, well, we're going to be off work for almost a week for our honeymoon, so I have a lot of work to hand over and stuff. That's just how it is. I wished he would tell me in advance so I could plan accordingly. Tell me in advance about overtime or any other unavoidable work. We could reschedule our meetings. Is that too hard? I can't always predict that in advance, and sometimes it's just impossible to do so. Lately, he's been using overtime as an excuse to come home late into the night. It's gotten to the point where he's coming home in the early hours of the morning, almost daily. Yet his pay doesn't seem to reflect that. Curious, I took a look at Bob's pay stub and realized something. His accumulated paid leave was in single digits. Hey, when I looked at this pay stub, it showed you only had 7 hours of leave left. Oh yeah, that's right. But last month you canceled our wedding planning sessions 4 times. And on the other days, you came home almost every day after I went to bed. Doesn't only 7 hours left sound a bit off? What's the matter? You don't trust me now? No, it's not about trust. I was just wondering if you're using your leave. You just don't know how it works, since you've never worked a full-time job. Well, even so, single-digit leave seems a bit odd, don't you think? So what? You're gonna go protest to my boss for me? Don't be ridiculous. This is making me sick. Furious, he opened the door harshly. I'm so over this. I don't even want to see your face right now. I wanted to discuss our honeymoon plans and the places we'd visit. I was staring at the door Bob stormed out of when I noticed a notification sound. I always have my cell on vibrate, so it's probably Bob's work phone. Without any cover, Bob's work phone was lying there, its screen clearly visible. Did Bob forget his work phone? Wait, what's this message? I was taken aback as I looked at the notification on the plain, unadorned screen of the work phone. The content of the message didn't seem related to work at all. A message from someone named Kathy read, "Want to go on a trip?" This could be a coworker, but the casual tone of the message gave me an uneasy feeling. Given it's a work phone, it might be from someone at the office or work-related. There must have been some prior conversation leading up to this message, but with the screen locked, there's an eerie vibe, yet I can't confirm the content. For a moment, I forgot about the message that had arrived on Bob's work phone and got immersed in preparing for our wedding and honeymoon. Despite the hectic preparations, I distinctly remember finally having a moment of relief once everything was settled for the wedding. Our wedding is the day after tomorrow. I'm excited about staying in the hotel the night before. Yeah, let's make it a ceremony that's truly ours. Our wedding was to be held at a hotel, and as a part of the package, we got to stay in a special suite. On the night before, Bob and I stayed in a special suite. We had both taken the day off for the wedding, so in the afternoon, we headed to the hotel. After relaxing in the bath, we went to the restaurant on the top floor for dinner. It's amazing that the hotel allows couples getting married to stay in the suite, isn't it? Yeah, I'm sorry I left most of the wedding planning to you, Catherine. It's all right. Your job seemed demanding, and the wedding planner was incredibly helpful. Everything seemed to fall into place. Having a calm conversation with Bob felt like a luxury after such a long time. Now that I think about it, there were many days where our schedules just didn't align. Catherine, I remember you had a few specific requests for the wedding, but the planner did a fantastic job, didn't she? Specific requests? Well, when I think about what would have happened without her, I'm really grateful. We arrived at the restaurant and took our seats. As a series of exquisite dishes, unlike anything we had before, were served, I noticed that Bob's glass was empty. What would you like to drink next? I'm not sure. Oh, Catherine, is that something on your sleeve? Maybe sauce? Bob pointed at my dress. What? Oh no, I might have spilled some dressing. I hope it doesn't stain. You should probably try and remove it quickly. Aren't you taking that dress on our honeymoon? Yes, I am. I'll be right back. It was a good thing I had brought a stain remover just in case. I hurriedly checked the sleeve at the restroom sink. There's no stain. Maybe Bob mistook a shadow for a stain? I thought it was about time for the main course to arrive, and quickly returned to the table where Bob was waiting. Hey, I've ordered drinks for both of us. Thanks. But isn't this a cocktail? Yeah, I found a cocktail that I thought Catherine might like. What do you think? Thank you, but we have our wedding tomorrow, remember? I wasn't planning on drinking tonight. Really? But one drink won't hurt, right? Come on, give it a try. Bob persisted, so I took it in my hand. A cocktail with a vibrant contrast of gradient orange and yellow. It's good. It has an orange flavor, but it's not too sweet, and there's a refreshing hint of herbs. Just my taste. You really know me, Bob. I thought you'd say that, Catherine. You think I don't know what you like? I underestimated you. What are you drinking, Bob? This. It's also a cocktail, but I think you won't like the taste, Catherine. Really? Normally, Bob would offer me to taste his drink, but this time he subtly declined. After a leisurely meal, when I returned to the room, an overwhelming sleepiness hit me. I wanted to enjoy the sweet a bit more, but I couldn't resist the urge to sleep, and crashed into bed. I'm sorry, I'm really sleepy right now. I'm going to take a quick shower and then go to bed. Got it? You've been busy with wedding preparations lately. Tomorrow is the big day, so get some rest. At that time, it was quite early, before 8 p.m. to go to bed, but I went to sleep right away. I woke up suddenly, and as I tried to get up, I heard someone talking. At first, I thought Bob was on the phone with someone, so I decided to go back to sleep. However, I had a slight headache. As I tried to change my position to grab the painkillers I always carry in my purse, I felt something off. There might be someone else in the room. But who could it be? This suite, provided by the hotel, was designed for 2 people. It was spacious, but it was strange to feel the presence of someone other than Bob and me. Is it okay? Your wife is asleep, right? It's fine. She won't wake up for a while. There are 2 bedrooms in this suite. She won't notice. Then we have to make the most of it. I couldn't recognize her, but I clearly heard a woman's voice. Then it hit me. This wasn't a phone call. There was another woman in the suite, Bob's lover. I remembered the hotel staff mentioning that this suite was their special room with 2 bedrooms. Holding my aching head, I carefully picked up my smartphone and headed to the other bedroom. I recorded the scene with my new smartphone, perfect for our honeymoon, and as expected from the latest model, you can clearly capture the 2 of them even in the dark. When I checked the time, it was 9:30 at night. Thinking it was only 9:30 p.m., I thought maybe it would be all right. After taking the video, I went back to the bed I had been sleeping in and quickly called someone. I immediately returned to my bed and contacted both sets of parents and Bob's boss. I was glad I had asked for their contact info at the pre-wedding get-together, where Bob invited me for drinks. I decided to send the video of the 2 in their secret meeting, along with a message. Soon after, I received replies from both my parents and my in-laws suggesting we should meet up and talk. However, I was prepared for the worst scenario. If we suddenly confronted them in a group, a person capable of cheating might just deny everything. It might cause more damage if we carefully planned our confrontation. I asked my parents and my in-laws who were staying in the hotel to wait for me in the elevator hall of the suite floor. Looking around the bedroom, I realized that Bob's clothes and his lover's clothes were carelessly thrown near the bed. I neatly collected them and locked them in a nearby safe. I randomly locked the safe to make sure they couldn't get their clothes out. Maybe it was due to the huge layout of the suite room, but even after I woke up, neither of them seemed to notice. From the other side of the bedroom where they seemed to be having fun, only the voices of Bob and his lover could be heard. It seemed like they were oblivious to the fact that I was awake, that their secret meeting was exposed, and that both my parents and my in-laws were on their way. After moving my belongings, I hid in a closet near the door and started using my phone. From inside the closet, I played the sound of a fire alarm at full volume on my smartphone. Hey, is that a fire alarm? What's that noise? Hey, that's a fire alarm sound. Is there a fire in this hotel? Oh no, I'm not ready to die yet. It's okay. I promise I won't let you die. Both of them panicked and ran out of the room. Once I saw them run a few meters down the hall, I closed the room door, and I could hear some chatter from outside. Wait, there's no fire, right? But we just heard the fire alarm sound, didn't we? It seemed Bob and his lover had finally realized. Hey Bob, what's with that getup? Plus, that's not Catherine next to you, is it? Who's that? Huh? What about a fire? What on earth are you talking about? Do you realize how you look right now? Jolted by his mother's words, the two looked at themselves and started to panic. They were in a sorry state, holding just a towel and surrounded by both sets of parents, a sight that obviously showed their embarrassment. What's this? Bob, what's going on? I have no idea. Why are we here? Were we tricked? It turned out to be a good decision to have my parents and in-laws wait by the elevator. And why are Dad and Mom here? And Catherine's parents too? Weren't you told that the families are going to stay at this hotel the night before the wedding? Huh? What's that? I wasn't told about families staying in a hotel. Just fix your undignified appearance first. We'll talk later. Right? Sorry about that. Let me go back to the room to get dressed. With that, he tried to enter the room but couldn't due to the automatic lock. Bob, try the door handle. Maybe it's locked from the inside? My phone. I can get someone inside to open it with my phone. Sorry, please wait a moment. Hold on, Bob. Your phone is inside the room, isn't it? What are you gonna do? Shoot. Hey, Catherine. Are you there? Are you awake? Open up. Hearing that Bob had drugged me made me even angrier. After making sure Bob was in a desperate situation, I opened the door. After checking through the peephole and seeing Bob nearly naked and in a panic, I opened the door. You didn't know that my parents and yours are staying at this hotel? Well, that makes sense. After all, you left all the wedding and honeymoon preparations up to me. Hey, you knew and didn't tell me? I did tell you. I said our parents were staying on a different floor. Maybe you just didn't listen? I thought you might not be paying attention since you always just nod. But I was right. Then his lover started causing a scene. Hey, you, get in here quick. Do you even understand what's going on? I'm sorry, who are you? Were you two having a little fun in the bedroom? Heard the fire alarm outside, got scared, ran out, and now your little secret is out in the open. Right? It's Kathy, Bob's girlfriend. If you understand the situation, let us in quick. Well, come on in. You two, everyone. I invited my parents and in-laws into the room. Hey, why are our parents involved in this? They have every right to be. Let's hear the explanation, shall we? Catherine, we're coming in if that's okay. Sure. I'd like to get this sorted out once and for all, too. As they entered, Bob and Kathy immediately headed to the bed and started looking for their clothes. Where are our clothes? Oh my, mine are gone, too. Bob, do you know where they are? How should I know? Damn, so we're supposed to just be naked? That's right. This room had bathrobes. We can wear those for now. The two of them hurried to the bathroom, but it was too late. I had already taken the bathrobes and big towels from the bathroom while they were distracted. You've got to be kidding. The bathrobes are gone? The bath towels are gone too. No clothes, no towels, what's going on? I stood in front of the two of them, holding the bathrobes. Hey, are you two looking for these bathrobes, since you're without clothes? Give them to us now. I'm getting cold. I'm freezing. Please give them to us. Ignoring their pleas, I took the two robes to the bathroom. The bathtub was still filled with water from their activities. And I dumped the robes into it. What the hell are you thinking? What are you doing? Do you want us to stay naked? There's nothing for people like you to wear in this room. Why don't you just stay naked? The two seemed to have given up and fell silent. Now Catherine and Bob and you, Kathy, was it? Let's hear what you have to say. Not only were they surrounded by their own parents, but also by my parents who would be considered Bob's in-laws. Bob was cornered in an almost naked state and looked more sheepish than I had ever seen before. It was just some pre-wedding fun. You know, just going with the flow. You've got to be kidding me. Bob, didn't you talk about going on a honeymoon with me? You said you'd divorce once the timing felt right after marriage, and then we'd be together. That's just a play on words, isn't it? Did you really take that seriously? Know the difference between being serious and joking. Joking, huh? I had heard from Catherine that you didn't even prepare for the wedding or the honeymoon, and were always coming home late at night. No, well, I've been swamped at work. Bob then whispered to me with a glare, Hey, did you rat me out to your family? Telling them about me, not even trusting your own husband. That's a low blow. Low blow? I wondered who was the one playing dirty here. Using your paid leave and only 7 hours left? What? What are you talking about, Catherine? His mother asked with a puzzled look. A few months before our wedding, Bob's coming home started getting really late. He said he was working overtime, but he actually consumed his paid leave, and there's only 7 hours left. Coming home late at night and using leave? That's odd. Are you still on that? I asked. You just don't have common sense for a working man. Bob waved his hands frantically, his face turning red. Maybe it's time to come clean, I suggested. I did ask your company about it, and they said you were leaving on time every day because you were preparing for our wedding. You can't mean finishing your work on time and using your leave. I exclaimed. Exactly. Instead of coming home and leaving all the wedding and honeymoon preparations to me, you were out having a good time with your mistress. A quick glance revealed my in-laws had turned livid. Bob, do you even care about Catherine? How can you betray someone who loved you like this? This kind of betrayal is unforgivable. Then my father calmly asked, Bob, if you wanted to cheat, why did you marry in the first place? Was it because you fancied Kathy here?
No, it was a moment of weakness, Bob replied.
That's a lie. Bob, you told me Catherine has a stable job, so she won't get fired. She seems financially stable. Otherwise, I wouldn't have chosen someone like her. Hearing Bob's true feelings from Kathy, I let out a sigh. Bob, just marry me. I can cook, and I'll be a good wife. You've got to be joking. Kathy, aren't you the one who said you're going to become an influencer and not renew your contract at my company? Influencer housewife sounds good, right? I don't care if you want to be an influencer or whatever. There's no way I'm marrying someone who's just trying to mooch off me. Listening to their ridiculous argument was giving me a headache. For the record, I'm not working to support Bob. And after all this, I can't continue our marriage. We're getting a divorce. Can you reconsider? We have our wedding tomorrow, and even my boss from work is attending. There's no way we can just cancel the wedding over a divorce. It seems like he only thinks of himself, even in situations like this. Reconsider? Seriously? Do you even realize what you've done? I'm sorry, let's just make up and start over, okay? Unable to bear Bob's attitude and words, my father chimed in. Do you think marrying my daughter is some sort of game? Yeah, you can't just apologize and hit the reset button whenever you're in a pinch. It doesn't work that way. In the end, the wedding plan for the next day was canceled, and naturally Bob had to pay the cancellation fee. It seemed Kathy had been aggressively pursuing Bob because she wanted to be married before she turned 26. But it looks like Bob was more inclined to break things off with her. The cancellation of the wedding and Bob's usual behavior at work had long since become the topic of office gossip. Bob was summoned at his job over the commotion and questioned about his relationship with Kathy, who was a temporary worker. He tried to play dumb, but with the testimonies and eyewitness accounts from colleagues, everything came to light. As a result, Bob was transferred to a remote location, but apparently he couldn't handle that and decided to quit. However, when Bob tried to find another job, it wasn't easy for him. There's a certain vibe he gives off from the way he speaks and acts, and he's been getting rejected in interviews left and right. Kathy, on the other hand, didn't renew her contract and boasted about becoming an influencer. But the internet can be cruel, and she's already being labeled as a cheater. Recently, she seems to be posting with a desperate desire for attention and to earn money, even if it means facing backlash. She's become the talk of the town in a rather negative light. One day, while I was handling customer service at the front desk, Kathy showed up shouting, "I heard that you were here, and I came because of Bob. Because of you, I can't work as an influencer. What can I help you with today? If there's nothing else, I'll be on my way." It was you, wasn't it? Posting about our affair and cheating? You're probably typing away at that computer right now, living off of our taxes, and yet you act so petty. I'm not sure what you're talking about. Please don't disturb the other customers. I signaled for security. Thankfully, because I work in a department known for difficult customers, the guards were quick to respond. Let go of me. I have business with this lady. This is a city hall. If you cause a disturbance, we may need to call the police. Keep that in mind. I calmly handled the situation just like always. Never thought my experience with difficult customers would come in handy in a situation like this. After that incident, Kathy never visited me again, which I'm grateful for. I still work at the city hall. My days are filled with work, which is good because it keeps me from dwelling on the divorce and the past chaos. One day, an old friend from college reached out and wanted to introduce me to someone. It seems we both like the same comic book artist, so my friend thought we'd get along well. I'm surprised to meet someone else who reads it, since not many people know about that comic. This friend knows my tastes and preferences well, so I'm eager to meet the person she recommended. After everything that happened with Bob, I wondered how my life would turn out. But now, between my job and new encounters, every day is fulfilling.